Hey guys, how are you doing? I'm great. Thank you so much for asking. So I feel like the comments under this video are going to get very interesting, and that's fine. That's fine because I'm not here to be liked. I'm not here for likes. I'm here to tell the truth. I'm here to be honest about the world as I see it. So come at me, bro. That's fine. So we're going to have a really honest conversation about Leaving Neverland. This is the documentary on HBO. It was shown over 2 nights and 2 hours each night. And then there was a 1-hour follow-up discussion featuring the director, the 2 men who are at the center of that documentary, and Oprah Winfrey herself. You know, it's been so funny. It's been hilarious seeing people talking about canceling Oprah. You can't cancel a billionaire, y'all. That's not how it works. You can't cancel a billionaire with her own TV network. Like, okay, y'all are, okay. So I was not expecting much from Leaving Neverland at all. I've heard about it, I've heard other people talk about it, and really I watched it because I just like to see what people are talking about. I don't like to be outside of the conversation. I want to see so that I can comment and do it responsibly and do it knowledgeably. I was not at all expecting to be affected or moved by this documentary in the way that I was. Not at all. After about 15 minutes, I realized how serious this is. And, you know, that's kind of ridiculous, right? Because from the get-go, I knew that we were talking about child molestation. We were talking about the man who was the biggest star that the planet has ever seen. We're talking about who knows how many young men's lives who were affected. Somehow I had convinced myself that there was nothing to these allegations, that these men were completely self-interested, that they were out to promote themselves and get money and be on TV and be famous, and that I would walk away from this documentary the same way that I walked in. And I didn't. These 4 hours were absolutely shocking and completely damning. But before we get into it, just on a technical note, I was immediately grabbed by how well made this documentary is. This is not something that somebody made on their iPhone and edited on iMovie. There was money put into it and there was care put into it. But then we get into the interviews, and the 2 men that this documentary follows are James Safechuck and Wade Robson. James Safechuck met Michael Jackson as a kid when he was in a commercial with him, and Wade met Michael Jackson in Australia after he won a dance contest. And pretty soon after Michael meets both of these boys, they kind of get entangled into the world of Michael Jackson. This documentary did a wonderful job of laying the groundwork for us and establishing the foundations of these relationships. They were very intimate. Michael got entangled not only with these boys and kind of acted as a friend slash mentor and brought them out on tour and let them perform with him, but he also became very intimate with their families. I was really struck by James Safechuck's mother talking about how she viewed Michael as another son. And I'm like, sis, y'all are almost the same age. This man is not your kid. I can't remember what her name was, but James Safechuck's mother talked about welcoming Michael into her home, and Michael would just stay at this regular house, and she'd make them cookies and wash his clothes, and they would just, and Michael and James at this time was like 10, and they would just, you know, hang out playing in the family home, and Michael would ride around in the family car, you know, completely integrating himself into this regular white American family. And Wade had a similar story. He started really hanging out with Michael when he was 7 years old, and Michael would call him on the phone, and they became really close and intimate, and not only was Michael talking to Wade, the little kid, but Michael developed a relationship with Wade's older sister, and he developed a relationship with Wade's mother, and Wade, by the way, is from Australia. By establishing those initial parallel foundations, this documentary really sets us up for the rest of this journey. What is so remarkable about the tellings of these stories from both James and Wade is how similar they are. These are people from opposite sides of the world who are describing things, and their experiences are not exactly the same, but they are very, very much alike. And there we have trying to establish this pattern of behavior with Michael Jackson. Now, like I said, I was not expecting to get anything out of this. I just thought it was gonna be, the National Enquirer, like something tawdry and entertaining. I began to be swayed by the level of detail in both of their accounts of what happened to them. When James Safechuck started to talk about his sexual encounters with Michael Jackson, and he did it with such painful detail, when he was talking about all of the places that he had sexual contact with Michael Jackson around Neverland, when he talked about the procedure that Michael Jackson had trained him in to make sure that they were never caught, because they were doing this in Neverland, and of course people are around, but Michael would take the kids off into different kind of remote locations inside of the home, and they needed to know if somebody was gonna come through the door, so they needed to get their clothes on real fast. I cannot remember the last time I was so horrified. These men went into such explicit detail about where it happened, what they did, what Michael did, what it looked like, what it felt like, what they were seeing. It was beyond uncomfortable. I cringed at different points in their interviews. I yelled, literally yelled. I had to pause a couple of times. I had to look away. It was a nightmare. It is impossible to hear about that kind of stuff being done to children. I feel like I'm getting emotional. It is impossible to hear about an adult person doing that to children and not be disgusted. I don't believe that James or Wade are that good of actors. Maybe they're making it up. Maybe they're conning us. I don't think so. And as gross and horrific as all of that detail was, I mean, Wade talking about feeling Michael Jackson's hair, both of them having very similar details about what Michael Jackson wanted them to do sexually. As horrifying as hearing all of those details are, as disturbing as it is to think about little kids being violated in that way, as creepy as it is to see both of them recount very similar details of what Michael Jackson liked, what he wanted them to do, what he told them to do after they did X and he did Y and they were laying in the bed together. As just appalling as that is, I actually get why they did that. I absolutely get why the filmmaker would go into that level of detail. I've never heard anything like that ever in my life. But I get it when you know that there are millions of people across the world who are going to be looking at these interviews and trying to find any tiny little hole. They did everything that they could to plug those holes, to make sure that there is no daylight, that all of their bases were covered. They had pictures, they had faxes, they had videos, they had memorabilia, they had disgusting details. And when you put all of that stuff together, I was convinced by that. And then you get the little incidental details. Like James's mom recalling a time when they were at Neverland and James and Michael were hiding away, and she went to open a door and the door was locked. And then Michael would say, I don't know, how did that happen? I don't know. The door just accidentally locked. And then you get details about how Michael has bells outside of his bedroom. Bells that would go off anytime somebody would approach. And what I also thought was really interesting was how not only did we get the details from the men and their mothers, but we also got to hear from their siblings and their families. Wade has a few siblings, and Wade's family was actually broken up over this, and Jimmy does not have any siblings, but he does have a wife now, and so does Wade. And hearing about how these things that happened when they were children, I mean, Wade was sexually abused, allegedly, by Michael Jackson from the age of 7 to 14. Hearing their wives, their partners, and their families talk about how they had extreme emotional difficulties later on in life, and they were depressed, and they didn't know what to do, and they were withdrawn. I thought that was quite fascinating. And it was good to hear from the moms. Because when you hear these men talk about what happened to them as children, the amount of access that Michael Jackson had to them when they were kids, you think, but didn't you have parents? And they did. But in the case of Wade, for example, Wade's parents let him stay with Michael Jackson by himself for a week when they went to the Grand Canyon. You don't know this man. That's where I got the parallels between Surviving R. Kelly and this documentary. Y'all are just giving your kids over to strangers just because they're famous? Y'all are letting a grown man, a man in his 30s, sleep in a bed with your kid? A really compelling part of this documentary is the mothers trying to process their guilt. It's of their children trying to work through forgiveness. And I always like a messy narrative, and there's a real messy narrative here because it's not wrapped up in a bow and Wade and James are like, oh, well, they didn't know any better, I forgive them. James and Wade are still trying to work through what it means in their late 30s, early 40s that their parents absolutely did not behave responsibly. You know, Wade's mom seems a little fragile, like she's very early in her process. But I appreciated that James's mom was like, yeah, I fucked up. My job was to protect my kid, to get them into adulthood as unscathed and untraumatized as possible, and I fucked it up. Yeah, you did. But at least now that you've acknowledged it, you can try to figure out a way to make amends and move forward. And I also appreciated that neither James nor Wade were like, no, it's not cool. I don't forgive him yet, but we're working toward it. After the documentary aired, there was a 1-hour Oprah special, and I did think it was particularly interesting that I think both of the men said that neither of their mothers had watched the parts of the film where they talked about the explicit, like horrifically, like I'm never gonna get over it, explicit details of the sexual assault that they endured. And both of them seem to be pretty troubled by that. And I think that's legitimate. Now, as a parent, do you want to hear the awful details of your kid being violated? No. But I think it is necessary to reckon with that stuff. You can't, because they're still trying to ignore it. You know, I think that the mothers not listening to what happened is still a way for them to evade the responsibility. It's almost like the guilt would be too much. And Wade's sister, you know, after Wade told his family that Michael Jackson had done this to him, and this was happened in like 2013 or whatever, a few years ago, Wade's sister said that immediately she was concerned that her mother was going to hurt herself. And I'm like, oh, that's a legitimate concern, because I can't imagine the level of guilt that they must feel. And clearly that guilt has not eased up, and who knows if it ever will. Probably not. You're probably gonna take that to your grave because your children are gonna take that to their graves. And then we have other questionable stuff like Michael Jackson buying the Safechucks a house after James Safechuck testified that Michael Jackson had not molested him. And this was back in 1993, 94. You know, if you are a Jackson-leaning skeptic, you have to say, well, that's weird. And there are other questions about Wade that other people have dragged out, and I think it's okay to ask those questions. But I've seen those questions, and I've seen the stuff that people say to paint Wade as an unreliable witness, and I still don't think Michael Jackson is innocent. I still think he did it. And I really just cannot have a conversation about Michael Jackson and these molestation allegations with people who refuse to watch this documentary. So many people have been going so hard and, you know, Michael is innocent and whatever. But if you haven't watched the documentary, we can't, there's nothing for us to talk about because I know stuff that you don't know. I feel like we live in a particularly pernicious, I'm not going to watch that, but I'm going to comment on it culture. And I will not be participating in any of those discussions. How are you telling me it's fake when you haven't seen it? And the Jacksons have been out here doing that. How are you telling me that it's fake and nothing in this documentary is true if you've never seen it? You know, there are a couple of things that were highlighted in this documentary that I had never considered before. For years, the narrative around Michael Jackson has been, oh, he's so childlike and he's so innocent and he just loves children and he loves to be around them. But what is outlined in the pattern of behavior that's repeated between these two boys is that Michael Jackson, maybe he loved kids and he loved fun and he loved games and riding rides, but he was also incredibly calculating and manipulative. And what pushed me over the top, right, is that these men were articulating in excruciating detail. I don't know how many times I can say this, but it was really, really terrible. The things that these two men told us in this documentary also add up with the two previous lawsuits. All of those stories align. There does appear to be a pattern. It's trips, it's gifts, it's sleepovers, it's taking them away from their families, it's telling them that they're best friends and saying that they have a special secret, and if you tell the secret then everybody's gonna go to jail and everybody's life is ruined. There is a real pattern of grooming and predation that Michael Jackson appears to have engaged in. And you know, the way that he was for a time with each of these kids in constant contact with these children. And this is back to the parents. You're letting your child speak on the phone. Why is an 8-year-old on the phone for hours with a grown man? Why? What are y'all discussing? I call my nieces, they're 6 years old, for 15 minutes. After 15 minutes, I'm like, okay, well, we're done. We don't have anything else to say. We've run out of topics of conversation. What are y'all talking about? Why is a grown adult man even requesting to be in the bed with the child? For what? Why are you requesting to be alone with this child for a week? Why? And then there's Michael telling them how lonely he was, and maybe he was lonely. I'm sure it's very, very lonely being the biggest star on the planet. But these degular people trying to swoop in and save the biggest star in the world, like it's not right. It's weird. But what makes it next level weird is the way that there was a rotation. So let's say you've gotten past Michael Jackson talking on the phone for hours with children, sleeping in the same bed with them, taking them away on trips for a week at a time, taking them on tour with him. Don't you think it's weird that he just swapped them out? That there was a rotation of children? That 1 week Wade is his best friend in the world and he loves him so much, and then the next week it's James, and then the next week it's Macaulay, and the next week it's Jordan, the next week it's Corey? You don't think it's strange that a grown man is swapping out children to be his best friend like they're accessories? That is not right. According to both men, Michael Jackson really emphasized that this was secret and what they had was special. James talked about Michael making a vow to him and giving him rings, and both boys talk about being in love with Michael Jackson. James talked about Michael giving him rings because James really loved jewelry, so they were like secretly married and they exchanged vows. And they kept quiet because they were so deeply invested in the secret. Like the secret was their lives. But eventually Michael swapped them out, as he did. New kids came in and took over. I thought it was really interesting the way that Wade in particular talked about maybe feeling a jealousy when he saw Michael palling around with Macaulay Culkin or whatever. What was really well handled about this documentary is why Wade would choose to testify on behalf of Michael Jackson during his 2005 trial. I do get it now. I think it's really weird that people try to downplay who Wade Robson was in the pop music universe and what he did and how much success he had at a ridiculously young age. Like, I used to love Britney Spears. I used to love NSYNC, love Justin Timberlake. Wade was there. Not only was he there as a choreographer, he was writing music, he was producing music, he was directing tours. He was so successful and so famous. Wade choreographed Slave for You. He's the one responsible for that really famous VMA performance with Britney with the snake. Like, this man was and he was 21 at that. Like, he was so young and so successful. So when Wade was talking about the fact that he was subpoenaed to testify on behalf of Michael Jackson, and he said what he had always been saying because he was afraid of the consequences, I understand that. 21 is young, you guys. It is, particularly if you have that level of unprocessed trauma. So Wade saying that he did not want to forfeit his career, that he didn't want his life to be completely uprooted and ruined by telling the truth, that makes sense to me. Because we are still not at a point culturally where we're having real honest conversations about sexual assault and sexual abuse of boys and men. Still. So 15 years ago, it completely makes sense. And it completely makes sense that if you are at a point in your life and your career where you are choreographing for Britney Spears and writing for NSYNC and all of that stuff, that you don't want your new identity to be Michael Jackson molestation victim. It would not have gone well. And even in some of the little clips that they showed of people asking him about it, people were always asking him about it in a real jokey way. That's not the way that we need to be talking about sexual assault and molestation. So what was he gonna do? And James decided that he was not going to testify in favor of Michael Jackson at that last trial. I really liked the way that the wives talked about this in such an honest way, but in a really caring way. When Amanda was describing how she was maybe a little bit concerned after Wade disclosed the molestation to her. She was concerned about how Wade might be looking at their child. I was like, ooh, that's, it's like cringy, but like, what an honest thing to say, because we don't know what it means to be a survivor of sexual abuse. So there have been a couple of critiques of this film. One of them is that the family wasn't reached out to, that they didn't include interviews with the family or Michael Jackson's lawyers, and I just think that's ridiculous. What are we gonna hear from the family? Why would we need to hear from what would they add to this? They're gonna say Michael Jackson didn't do it, they know their brother, but in reality, they weren't there. Okay, you know your brother, but were you at Neverland every day? No, you weren't. In fact, what we do know about the Jacksons is there are an extended period of time where Michael really wasn't fucking with them like that. They could not get access to him. And there was like active beef in the late 80s between Michael and Jermaine. There's a whole story there, right? Y'all were not there. Toward the end of his life, yes, they all showed up for the trial, but how many stories have we heard about how Michael disconnected from his family, besides Janet, because, Janet and Michael, close. And, Michael and Catherine, close. But he wasn't really messing with y'all like that. We've heard them talk about how they knew he was an addict and they couldn't intervene. So y'all are trying to tell me that there's no way this is possible because you just know your brother, but you weren't there every day. I've also seen lots of criticisms of Wade, and people are trying to act like Wade is some washed up has-been. That is false. Like, what are y'all talking about? This is a kid who's been on as a choreographer since he was 14, but okay, whatever. And there's questions about why he would file a lawsuit seeking money against the estate. Now, Yeah, it is kind of weird, right? But on the other hand, people file lawsuits against the estates of dead people all the time. That's not uncommon practice at all. And because Michael Jackson is dead, I mean, your options are really limited. Now, I think that he hurt his credibility by seeking money. He did. But you can't take him to court. I mean, you can't try to arrest him. He's dead. Whatever counsel that he got about the appropriate way to handle this stuff probably wasn't the best counsel. He should have done something else, but I still believe him, right? And the other thing that people have not addressed is, let's say you've completely discredited Wade. What about James? James is still there with a story that is very creepily similar to Wade's. Macaulay Culkin and Corey Feldman have come out very hard trying to dispute what Wade and James have said. I believe them. I believe Corey and I believe Macaulay Culkin when they say that Michael Jackson did not sexually assault them. I don't know what that has to do with James and Wade though. I mean, let's look at the Catholic Church. Did all abusive priests and nuns abuse every single child that they had access to? No. Does every rapist who preys on adult women rape every woman he goes on a date with or gets alone with? No. People choose their victims. So I believe that Corey and Macaulay are going hard for their friend and his memory and what they know of him. But that does not prove anything for me. And then the flimsiest excuse of them all, but the excuse that seems to be the most pervasive is, he's dead. He's dead. Why are we talking about this? He's dead. Are you, what? Are you, what? First of all, we talk about the horrible things that dead people do all the time. Have you been in a history class? Look, Thomas Jefferson has been dead for 200 years, but I'm still gonna talk about how he abused Sally Hemings. Like, have you been in a history class? Have you watched a documentary? Have you read a biography? We talk about the horrible things that people who are not here to defend themselves do every single day. That makes no sense. But not only is it weird, it's even weirder that people are talking about, oh, he's dead, he can't defend himself, when the people who this allegedly happened to are still here. They're not dead. That's why we're talking about it. Because Michael Jackson unfortunately died at 50, very, very young, and left behind alleged victims who are also very, very young, and they're still here, and they're going to be reckoning with this trauma for the rest of their lives. So they do get to talk about it. It's so unfortunate that our ideas of justice are so attached to carcerality and the prison system. So many people are like, well, it doesn't matter because he can't go to jail. Like, what? Your idea of justice is only about if somebody is going to jail? These men are talking about horrific things that happen to them so that they can process it and move on and potentially help other people. That is also a form of justice. It's not about, is he going to get a 20-year sentence? Finally, yeah, it was wrong for these parents to be so neglectful. Outright neglectful. You let your kids sleep in the bed with somebody that they don't know. Look, my little nieces had a birthday party last year, and they had a little sleepover. And I was in the guest room kind of as a chaperone. And in the middle of the night, one of the little girls, and they were cousins, one of their little girl cousins came into my room, said she couldn't sleep, and said, oh, can I get in the bed with you? I said, no, girl. No, you cannot. Because it's not appropriate. I'm the adult. It is my responsibility to say no. But you know what you can do? If you want to sit in that chair over there, that's okay. But no, you can't get in the bed with me. That's inappropriate. Do I need to get you another blanket to make you more comfortable in your little cot? That's what I can do for you because I'm grown. It is not appropriate for us to be in the same bed because you don't know me like that. The outs that you give for a grown man participating in behavior that is clearly wrong and inappropriate is crazy to me. It's crazy. Now look, I love human nature like everybody else loves human nature. But we're taking it too far. So anyways, guys, that's all I have to say about that. I know that there's going to be a very lively discussion in the comment section under this video, so let's get it popping. I'm very excited to hear what y'all have to say. Thank you so much for watching. Obviously on Patreon, I filmed a companion video of me talking about the much requested topic of Jordyn Woods and the Kardashian fallout, and all I have to say about that is Jordyn Woods 1. That's patrons only. Head on over there to check that out. Send me an email, leave a comment. I am sure you will. Leave a comment. Buy some merch, sign up for the email newsletter. Shout out to Anita Baker. This is a shirt I got from the official Anita Baker tour. You bring me joy. Love Anita Baker. I'm sure she's not thrilled that I just shouted her out on the most controversial video, but whatever. I will see you guys later. Bye.